Kia ora and welcome. Today we're talking about the Protected Areas Network for New Zealand, or PANZ for short. Over the last few months, Simon and Stella have been exploring what it would take to develop a modern PANZ dataset, which incorporates all the relevant data from all sources across New Zealand and informs national and international reporting, as well as monitoring efforts on the ground. Some of you have already attended a webinar or a workshop on this topic, or perhaps completed a survey to help us understand the resources and uses that everyone might have for PANZ. A big thank you for all of those contributions. We could not have done this without you. But even if you've not been involved already, this webinar will still make sense. This is part of an ongoing project, and we're really pleased to update as we go along and remind you that this is not the end. I'll be back at the end of the talk for questions and answers. But now over to the team. I think Stella's going to make a start.
Okay, thank you, Christine, and good morning, everybody. As Christine said, Simon and I, with our colleagues at Landcare Research, have been working on the second phase of the PANZ New Zealand investigation. So this webinar today is partly to close the loop, because a lot of you here today and a lot of other people have been helping us by participating in this investigation, either by coming to the previous webinar, coming to the workshop that was run, or responding to the recent survey. And we do like to get back to you, close the loop, and say thank you very much for your help. Just to remind you all, the original webinar that we had, where we looked at the state of the current PANZ database, it's still available online if you need to go back and have a refresher. There's a lot of information in there. Could I have the next slide, Simon? So before we go into the main body of today's talk, we're just a couple of slides to remind us all why we're here. One of the things is we got a wee bit of a rap over the knuckles in a recent OECD environmental performance review that said really we had a bit of a shortage of reliable national uniform data, especially for biodiversity investigations and protections. Next slide. And when it comes to our national aspirations, we do have a recent biodiversity strategy, which would be greatly helped by a good protected areas of New Zealand database. And we also have international aspirational targets, such as the 30-30 targets, to say that we should be ensuring at least 30% globally of land areas and sea areas are maintained, managed, and connected well. Next. At the moment, the Protected Areas of New Zealand database is in a bit of a poorly state. The data is somewhat fragmented. It hasn't actually been publicly released since 2007, even though there have been a few updates carried out for particular projects. And as well as that, most of us all know there are a number of gaps in the data that are there. Next. And to make it even worse, our cousins across the ditch in Australia at this stage are actually beating us on something. They've got a very good national system of both terrestrial and marine protected areas. And at the moment, they're, if you look at their checklist there on the right, they're managing to maintain and update this approximately every 2 years. So we're getting a wee bit behind. So what are we doing? In the second part of the Protected Areas of New Zealand review that Simon and I and our colleagues have been doing, we've been consulting a lot of people listening here today and are the experts in this area. We're trying to get together the collective knowledge of all of us to inform the future versions of how we could make a really good Protected Areas of New Zealand database. And we also wanted to find out what people are actually using this data for and what they want to use this data for, so that whatever PANs we set up will best deliver the value. And now I'm going to hand over to Simon, and he's going to tell you about how we engaged with you and what you all said.
Hey, thanks, Stella. Hey, could I just get you to push mute on your mic? There's a bit of static sort of noise coming through.
Sure.
So, yeah, so as Stella said, we have undertaken several rounds of engagements, and that started with the previous webinar where we had 505 attendees, and they also participated by providing feedback as part of that webinar. We had 29 participants in an online workshop, and we sent out an online survey to many of you. We had 75 responses, and this focused on the users of PANS data and the providers of PANS data. So I'm just going to jump through what some of those responses looked like. So we had 31 pieces of feedback and questions raised, which we responded to. And these questions and responses can be found on the linked online website. So I'm going to talk about a few of the points I'll talk to later. We'll refer to some of the questions in this document. We ran a workshop where we prompted stakeholders to think about a future PANS. This included the value, the top left there, the yellow and green is the discussions around the value of PANS. Note it's the largest, and the wish lists, and as well as some of the barriers people perceived to developing a new iteration and releasing a new version of a PANS data system. So we also undertook a survey as well as getting lots of data that we turned into graphs. We also got a lot of text feedback. I thought this one summarized a lot of the sentiment we heard, so I'm just going to quickly read it for you. Having a single source of truth for protected areas will be hugely beneficial. Prioritizing future protections and areas for integrated conservation effort requires a knowledge of the protected areas network. Council data is, in particular, is inconsistent and hard to source and maintain, so will be particularly beneficial to be compiled at a national level. PANS would save us time and give us confidence that we were consulting current data. So I'm going to speak to the survey response here, first through the user's perspective, but these are the findings and the responses are very common across all forms of engagements. So we asked users of potential new iterations of PANS about the value they would obtain from a PANS database and information system. And we heard 4 themes, one about measure, and this was the same as the workshop, measure, monitor, and report. So this included reporting on our obligations around, for example, 30 by 30. Informing decision-making. We heard that efficient investment was more efficient when people had the protected area data they required in the planning stage. This might be investment around, say, road infrastructure. Without that protected area data, in the initial stage, there were inefficiencies. The people would better understand protections, and this included that important connectiveness that seems to be in all the national and international strategies around protected areas, and how species are protected and how protected areas should be prioritized in the future. We heard a lot about data management, particularly in ease of access. So we're hearing that people see a lot of duplication of effort in protected area data management. And this is an inefficiency to the New Zealand economy, people undertaking the same tasks to get the same results. And we hear that it's often too difficult to aggregate protected area data at a national unified level, and therefore it's often not included in decision making and planning. So what does that mean? Our finding is that an up-to-date PANS should be funded and the data made openly available. So there's going to be a pattern here. I'm going to introduce what we've found and then quickly point to what that means for a future version of PANS. So we asked users about how they would like to access PANS data in the future, and we heard that they would like a dedicated web viewer, access it over APIs, and to be able to download the data. So we already have systems in place in organisations such as the Ministry for the Environment and Manaaki Whenua, and we recommend that the already subscribed to Coordinates platform for sharing spatial data should be used for the download and automated API access. And in terms of the dedicated web viewer, this is quite common across many jurisdictions. Here we can see the USGS protected area database. You can click on these common view buttons and see that protected area data reformed into different views based on different attributes. So PAN's use has been shared, such as the 2007 dataset, over a dedicated web viewer. So this is not new, but it's nice to see that users are indicating that this is particularly useful. We heard in the survey, but very much in the initial webinar, that why aren't we just using the world database on protected areas? So this aggregates national protected area data into a global protected area database. So we do not recommend relying solely on the world database for protected areas. This would see too much control. It's only updated every 5 years for each nation. This affects the correction process, something we've been focusing on, how local government, central government in New Zealand will propagate corrections to users. And it doesn't have the flexibility to include things like a local ranking schema for protections, such as we have recommended in the phase 1 work. And there's also a difference in those protected areas stored in New Zealand protected area data sets and this global data set. So on that map there on the right, the grey is the world database on protected area data. Green and blue are DOC and LINS held areas. And the grey overlaps the other two data sets. The only thing we can see there isn't held in the world database on protected areas. And what we're seeing there are reserves for wetland management and wildlife management purposes. And we've identified we'd like to hold, aggregate and share those. So we believe that the world database on protected areas is something that we should support rather than rely on. One of many products that we believe that PANS can underpin, enable and support. We talk to users as well as the data providers to understand any privacy concerns that people may have around the release of national protected area data. What we heard was there were concerns around private details being made public, landowners' details being made public. And we heard many times that people were worried that people believed they may have a right of access to private land because a protection has been published there. And we also, a common theme was people were worried that protected areas would be degraded due to people seeking out rare fauna and flora, particularly if species occurrence was to be described. We also heard from stakeholders that they believed that these concerns could be managed. So people indicated that, and these matched all the concerns people had, or stakeholders had put forward solutions, making our job very easy. So protected personal data shouldn't be shared to PANS in the first place, we heard, and we agree with this. And if it were to be shared, PANS should not publish this. Sensitive species information should not be included in PANS. And a data field should be incorporated in PANS that indicates if the protection is on public or private land, to make it clear where these protections are very much on private land and therefore the access is not granted. We heard a lot on what data should be included in a protected area database. We heard about significant natural areas, and there were people who had put on their wish list that they would like to see these included in a protected national level database, and people that thought they shouldn't be included. We heard a lot of people were struggling with local government covenant data, and PANS has a role to play in solving this. And what we mostly heard about was the data attributes describing protected areas that should be included, and I will touch on that. So we still stick by the phase 1 recommendations. This included having internationally protected areas such as Ramsar wetlands in the PANS database, including marine protected areas. And this is again because of the connectiveness that a lot of these strategies talk about, from ocean depths to mountain tops. So it should be in one place. And areas that haven't been previously included, such as Te Iraoara. And these new areas need to be ranked. In terms of significant natural areas, they are currently under review. There's a lot of discussion currently about these. And due to this ambiguity, we believe that we should wait until the future is clear before we continue to discuss the inclusion of these. But any PAN system development should be developed in a way that any protected area type is easy to include in the system when required. And this allows for the development of new types of protections and to PANs to easily represent these. This is what we heard a lot about, protected area data attributes. People through all forms of engagement indicated they would like to see environmental condition included, biodiversity data, such as species occurrence, measures of environmental value, catchment information, details communicating who manages each area, associated ERI details, descriptions of what's being protected, management plan details, environmental measures, including water quality and plant survival rates. What we find is this is just too broad for PANs to be successful to support all these different requirements. So PANs should be a functional foundational layer that enables other products. So this includes having concepts around allowing other data sets to be easily integrated, such as persistent identifiers. So what I'm saying here is PANs has a large role in underlying other products where people can easily attach the information such as data management plans to create new products. And without a PANs, it's very difficult to do that. So we think there's a lot of value in just releasing this functional foundational layer. We also asked data users about what frequency they would want to see a protected area information system updated at. And what we found was 64% of users wanted the data updated at least annually and 28% at least monthly. So our recommendation is PANs must be updated at least annually, but where data providers are providing data frequently, we want to be able to support them reach the users more frequently also. So I'm going to go through some of the findings of the data provider component of the survey and then talk about what that means at the end. So how is the data shared? So when it is shared via email mostly, it's followed by API automated access. A lot of the data sets were indicated as not being shared, but we think this is suppressed demand here because a lot of these data sets have no visibility, for example, of the internet and therefore aren't being requested for sharing in the first place. What type of licensing are these data sets being shared under? We talked about this in detail in the phase 1 webinar. This is very important because PANs can't on-share data if it's not communicated that this is allowed. So things like Creative Commons is a great way to do that. And we've found there's quite a low occurrence of license details in general being attached to these data sets. Where we have other, that was people that were unsure, and the most common response, and there's a difference between local government and non-local government entities where none was more common than licensing being provided. So how often are protected area data sets updated? So other, and other was across the board, meaning that people update not monthly, not annually, not a set interval, but as required, as protected areas change, they update the data sets to reflect this. This was very interesting, how complete is your protected area data set. So we saw a large difference between local government protected area data sets and those data sets that are provided by non-local government entities. Quite a drastic difference there, with local governments having a much less or much more incomplete data. So to summarize those things, most data is shared over email. Many data sets are not licensed. Many people want this data more frequent than annually, at least annually, and a large amount of the data sets have incomplete data. So this informs how the data system and system as a whole should be developed. So we have done a very high level architecture to build on a few principles that we think are important in removing barriers to participation. So we think there should be a hybrid approach to loading data into a future PANs system. This should allow those that are using email, which is currently the most predominant, to still continue to do this, to not create a barrier. But we want to move them to more efficient techniques. So this includes having an upload portal where they would, when they make changes, and again, that isn't at a set frequency, they can go to the upload portal and add this data. And this second most common method of sharing data was over APIs, and this is the most efficient, and we want to support that, allowing people to make changes within the organization and in the system, the PAN system automatically picking those up and passing them on to the users in their real time. Those second two, the self-publishing and automated technique, will require agreed data exchange formats. So a governance group's going to have to work with data providers, and PANS is going to have to provide support to come to some of these agreed methods of sharing the data. All this is enabled by an idea of a common data processing backend that would efficiently support this hybrid approach to uploading data to PANS. But it's not just a technical architectural solution that we need to focus on. We need to focus on improving that data completeness and the data sharing. So PANS needs to work with data providers to ensure data is licensed. And what we found was many data sets are already being shared, are just not licensed. So it's not the intent that these aren't shared, it's just an understanding around that license requirement. So as per this quote below in green, PANS is only as complete as underlying data set. So we heard from people saying things such as this project could be of use to us if it were to provide resourcing for daylighting and mapping covenant data held, e.g. in paper archives, legacy data store, and LINS land titles. So there is an opportunity for PANS, and I would think of significant benefit to PANS to fund and resource some of the improvement of the local data sets to PANS and to national users' benefits. As I said, there must be agreement on standards, so a governance body needs to work on bringing people together to have these discussions. And these issues of collating environmental data have been so well described for so long by the New Zealand government, and PANS should ideally not be going this alone. Many data sets suffer from the same data sharing environmental problems, and we should be looking to do this in a joined up manner, which will require leadership from the New Zealand government as a whole. But PANS should look for opportunities, for example, when emailing data providers about data, to evangelize efficient methods of sharing data. So in conclusion, PANS should receive ongoing funding to deliver value to its users. Data standards must be agreed to lower the cost of data transactions and ensure that data is updated frequently. A hybrid system must be delivered to ensure there are no barriers to participation for data providers. PANS should be considered a foundational layer that underpins other products. Sensitive data should be obscured and not shared in the first place. PANS should look to work with other programs to improve data sharing maturity. So at this stage, I'd like to thank all those that have provided this feedback. Again, this is to gain a collective knowledge so that we can ensure we're delivering the most value in the long run to the users of PANS and supporting the providers of the PANS data. I'd like to really thank all those also internally that have been involved in supporting us have these discussions. And at this stage, I'd like to hand over to questions.
Great. Hey, thanks, Simon and Stella, for that. It's great. Even on the inside, I hadn't grasped all the work that you've done there. So that's fantastic. We've got some good questions. We've got a few about some of those gnarly areas like SNAs and the fast track approvals bill. And so rather than having too many more of those that we probably just can't answer at this stage, by all means put them in. But we want to go away and think about some of those kind of things and the suggestions that have been made as well, rather than trying to answer off the cuff when this is very much a work in progress. So thanks for those questions, and apologies, we're probably not going to jump into those today. But we did have a really great question from Shane. He said, looking at the Australian example that you included earlier, there wasn't a distinction between different types of protected areas. Would the intention for PANS to be able to distinguish between different types of protected areas and different types of protections?
Yeah, that's correct. So we had a slide there. I could have gone into a few of those bullet points, but we have some key recommendations around what data is included, and that is under what legislation those areas are protected, the type of those protections, as well as the IUCN ranking and the ranking that is recommended in the New Zealand context for ranking the protection afforded to those areas in terms of biodiversity. So, and then the idea is, like many other jurisdictions, there would be this web viewer where you could, without having a whole lot of technical data ability, go into this web viewer and select different views, which will sort of reproject that data into different rankings, for example, so we can look at just those highest ranked areas that provide the most protection in terms of biodiversity.
Thanks, Simon. This one's probably a question for you as well. We've got people on the call who are members of the New Zealand Rangers Association. Rangers are using multiple platforms to do their jobs on both desktops and mobile phones towards the 30 by 30 objectives. Will PAN's information be available in a streamlined format and potentially on a mobile device?
Yeah, so we did hear that people want to use this data in the field. So it will be provided for each update in a consistent format, so that won't be changing, so that once you have your systems integrated with this data, it can freely be updated without any friction. So we will be providing API access, so that data can be streamed to computers, but in the field you might not have internet. So that's why we're providing that download as well, so people can download that data. It'll all be made available in standardized geospatial formats. So there should be no major friction to taking that data into the field.
Great, and we've probably got time for one more question. Why have data presented with the grouped around local government and non-local government? Can you be a bit more explicit about whose data you were talking about in the non-local government section?
Yeah, so in the non-local government section, Department of Conservation provide quite a few spatial layers, such as we talked about the Ramsar data, as well as their conservation areas on public land. We also have Land Information, New Zealand supplying information about protected area data. Thinking of the other major non-government entities we had as well. So we also have the likes of Kiwi2 and other trusts that covenant data or have covenant data information and supply that to systems such as PANS. And what we found there is we see those being shared at a different efficiencies in terms of data maturity, and we saw that in those graphs. Some of those trusts are particularly doing a good job in sharing data. I'm very impressed by how they manage their data and share it.
Great. Hey, I think we have got time for one more, and that is, would the database include Indigenous protection, such as Rahui, which might be temporary?
Yeah, we talked about this in the first round of exploring possible data for PANS. At this stage, we've decided to focus on just permanent data. And this is just for the reason of getting what we have traditionally done and haven't been doing right first, but we want to deliver a flexible system that can be expanded, but we're really focusing on what we're seeing as the core data. And that's in terms of such as these 30 by 30 initiatives that will be fed into these systems, such as the World Database on Protected Areas. But there need to be conversations about that in the future for sure.
Great. Thanks, team. We've traversed a really wide range of questions here. Appreciate you being able to respond to all of those. We have got more questions, and for all of those who have asked or sent in a comment, rest assured we will come back to you with responses, and those Q&As will also be published on our website along with all of the other information, presentation and the recording of this webinar on our website, so you can go back to it as many times as you like and share with others. I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone who's come along and joined with us today, and to let you know that we will be back in about 2 weeks with our next webinar from the Landcare Research Link series. But for now, over and out. Bye.